Tulsa, Oklahoma, October 1954. A man had just gotten out of the hospital. He was weak, but finally home. His wife, smiling and caring as always, cooked him a special dinner to celebrate. She even made his favorite dessert, prune cake. That night, while everyone slept, something went terribly wrong. By morning, he was gone. No one could explain how a man recovering from illness could suddenly die, just days after getting better. And the woman who fed him that night? Well, she had secrets. Nancy Hazel was born on November 4, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama, a small town nestled between Anniston and Jacksonville, now part of Anniston. She was the first of 5 children born to James and Louisa Hazel. However, records from that time suggest that Nancy was conceived out of wedlock. Census data from 1905 shows Louisa living alone with her infant daughter, while James only appeared in the household later. Nancy's childhood was shaped by an oppressive and turbulent home environment. James, a harsh and domineering man, kept his children out of school for extended periods to help with chores and work the family farm. Meanwhile, Louisa stood in stark contrast, a nurturing and gentle presence who tried to protect her children. Still, the constant control and mistreatment left lasting scars. Nancy never received a proper education and struggled with literacy, finding her only comfort in secretly reading her mother's romance magazines. Her favorite section was the Lonely Hearts column, where people placed ads searching for love, a world of possibility that she dreamed might one day be hers. But her father, a religious fanatic, believed those publications were sinful and forbade them in the house. At the age of 7, Nancy suffered a head injury while traveling with her family to visit relatives in southern Alabama. During an abrupt train stop, she was thrown forward and struck her head on a metal bar. The injury triggered frequent fainting spells and intense headaches, symptoms that would persist for years and later be blamed for her emotional instability. As Nancy entered her teenage years, James's grip tightened. He prohibited her and her sisters from wearing makeup or dressing attractively, convinced it would deter unwanted male attention. He also forbade them from attending dances or social events. Despite this, Nancy became a victim of sexual abuse by men in the area, experiences she kept hidden. At 15, Nancy took a job at the Linen Thread Company, a textile factory in nearby Anniston. The work gave her a taste of independence and allowed her to buy the makeup and romance magazines she still read in secret. It was at the factory that she met 20-year-old Charlie Braggs, who lived with his single mother. After only 4 months of courtship, and with her father's surprising approval, Nancy, barely 16, married Charlie in 1921. But her marriage offered no escape. Charlie insisted his mother move in with them, and the older woman soon took over every part of Nancy's life. She wasn't allowed visitors, or even a say in how the household ran. Between 1923 and 1927, Nancy gave birth to 4 daughters. Over time, the relationship crumbled. Nancy turned to alcohol and tobacco, eventually developing a dependency. Both she and Charlie grew distant, suspicious of each other's fidelity. Charlie would vanish for days, confirming Nancy's worst fears. Tragedy struck in late 1927. Within just 2 weeks, their two middle girls died under mysterious circumstances. Both had appeared healthy when Charlie left for work, only to collapse in convulsions after breakfast and die shortly after. Doctors at the hospital cited food poisoning, but Nancy, who had prepared the meals, offered no explanation. Charlie, shaken, refused to eat anything she cooked from then on and began to fear for his own safety. Soon after, he moved out with their eldest daughter Melvina, leaving the newborn Florine in Nancy's care since she still needed breastfeeding. When Charlie's mother passed away, Nancy began working at a cotton mill to support Florine. In the summer of 1928, Charlie returned, this time with Melvina and a new partner. By the end of the year, he filed for divorce, which Nancy accepted without protest. She packed her belongings and moved to Cedartown, Georgia, hoping to start fresh. In her loneliness, Nancy sought solace in romance novels and Lonely Hearts ads. She began corresponding with men who posted in the magazines and eventually caught the attention of 23-year-old Robert Franklin Harrelson, a Mason from Jacksonville. Their exchange of letters and photographs quickly escalated, and in 1929 the two married and relocated to Anniston. But in a chilling act of abandonment, Nancy left little Florine behind in the empty house. Neighbors alerted Charlie, who retrieved his daughter and tried to contact Nancy, but she refused to take the child back. Her new marriage to Robert soon soured. He was an alcoholic and, as Nancy would later discover, had a criminal record for assault. Still, they remained together in a volatile and unhappy relationship for the next 16 years. In 1943, Nancy's life took another unexpected turn when her now adult daughter Melvina contacted her. Separated from her husband and 8 months pregnant, Melvina asked to live with Nancy and Robert. After some hesitation, Nancy agreed. That same year, Melvina gave birth to a son. The delivery was difficult, and she spent weeks in recovery under the influence of ether anesthesia. One day, in a haze, Melvina recalled seeing her mother standing over the crib, driving a hatpin into the baby's skull. She was never sure whether it had really happened or was a nightmare brought on by the drugs. But soon after, the infant died in Nancy's arms. Doctors couldn't determine a cause, and the death certificate simply read, "Sudden infant death." Following the mysterious death of Melvina's newborn, suspicions began to grow. Melvina couldn't shake the image of her mother standing beside the crib with a pin in hand, especially since the infant had died in Nancy's arms. Though she never voiced her fears aloud, the unease lingered. Despite her doubts, Melvina didn't leave the house. She had met a soldier nearby and was determined to pursue the relationship, even as tensions with Nancy flared. Their arguments became frequent, prompting Melvina to spend short periods visiting her father for peace. In 1945, Melvina gave birth again, this time to a son named Robert Lee. Her relationship with Nancy had deteriorated to the point of being unbearable. Wanting a permanent escape, Melvina returned to her father's home to ask if she and the baby could move in. During her absence, she left Robert in Nancy's care, trusting, perhaps blindly, that her mother would love him as she had claimed. On July 7, 1945, Nancy and her grandson were alone in the house. That day, Robert died, reportedly from suffocation, having rolled onto his face in bed with his head trapped under a pillow. The cause of death was ambiguous enough to prompt an autopsy, but the coroner ultimately declared it an accidental asphyxiation of undetermined cause. What no one found suspicious was that just a month later, Nancy collected a $500 life insurance policy she had quietly taken out on the baby, naming herself as the sole beneficiary. That same year, Nancy was still married to her second husband, Frank. but Frank's alcoholism and increasingly violent behavior had become intolerable. Then came September 1945. As the Second World War drew to a close, Frank, once a soldier, celebrated Japan's surrender with excessive drinking. On the night of September 14th, he returned home drunk, violent, and demanding. He forced himself on Nancy, an act that became the final breaking point. After the assault, he asked her to bring him the corn whiskey he had left in the kitchen. Nancy complied, but laced the bottle with rat poison. Frank drank it, writhed in pain for hours, and finally died. Yet again, the cause of death was attributed to alcohol poisoning or natural illness. No one suspected foul play, and Frank was buried with no investigation. Shortly after his death, Nancy collected another $500 life insurance payout and used the money to buy 10 acres of land and build a modest home outside Jacksonville. Now, after 16 years of marriage, Nancy was single again and ready to find a new partner, or perhaps, more accurately, her next victim. In early 1950, Nancy moved to Lexington, North Carolina, where she once again turned to the Lonely Hearts columns in romance magazines. It was through one of these ads that she met Arlie Lanning, a widower who had also been searching for companionship. After exchanging letters for a couple of months, the two met in person. Just 3 days after their first meeting, they married. But Arlie quickly revealed himself to be cut from the same cloth as her previous husbands, unfaithful and addicted to alcohol. Though he had affairs, it was Nancy who would often vanish without explanation for weeks or even months at a time. Outwardly, however, she maintained the image of a devoted and cheerful wife. Neighbors adored her, always smiling, always helpful. When she disappeared, Arlie claimed she was simply visiting her daughter. No one realized the relationship was disintegrating behind closed doors. In 1952, Nancy grew tired of Arlie's ways. She poisoned one of his meals with rat poison, and within hours he was dead. The cause of death was ruled heart failure. He was a heavy drinker, and there had been a recent flu outbreak in the area. These factors, along with Nancy's public persona as a loving wife, meant no autopsy was ordered. The town mourned with her, unaware of the truth. But then came something unexpected. Just a month later, the house Arlie had owned, the one Nancy still lived in, burned to the ground. Only the foundation remained. Curiously, a fire insurance policy in Nancy's name covered the loss. With the payout, she briefly stayed with her late husband's mother, but that chapter closed quickly when the elderly woman died in her sleep. Once again, Nancy was left without a home. She moved on, relocating to her sister Dovie's house. Dovie was bedridden with illness, and 2 weeks after Nancy arrived, she passed away. Given her medical condition, no one questioned the timing of her death, but for those who would later study the pattern, the coincidence was chilling. That same year, Nancy resumed her hunt for another husband. She joined a dating service called the Diamond Circle Club and soon met Richard L. Morton of Jamestown, North Carolina. They married in 1952 in Kansas. Though Richard didn't have a drinking problem like her previous husbands, he had his own vices, namely chasing women. He frequently traveled into town and stayed away for long stretches, presumably to pursue other women. Nancy was increasingly irritated and, once again, began contemplating lethal measures. But before she could act, another distraction arrived. In January 1953, Richard informed her that Nancy's own mother, Louisa, had suffered a hip fracture and recently become widowed. He invited Louisa to live with them. Nancy was furious. Richard hadn't even warned her that her mother was moving in. Still, she accepted the situation outwardly. Louisa arrived abruptly, and within 15 days, she was dead. She had complained of sharp stomach pain shortly before passing, a symptom consistent with poisoning. Nancy had used rat poison again, this time to kill her own mother. After the death of her mother Louisa, which was officially recorded as due to natural causes, Nancy refocused her attention on her husband, Richard. Her resentment toward him had only deepened, fueled by his infidelities and wandering eye. Just 3 months later, on May 19th, Nancy once again resorted to her favored method of murder. She prepared a thermos of coffee, laced with arsenic, and handed it to Richard. He died in his sleep, never realizing that his wife had poisoned him. Later that year, Nancy visited another sister. The visit ended in tragedy. The sister began suffering unexplained stomach cramps, followed by seizures. She lost consciousness and died shortly after. Although the symptoms mirrored those of poisoning, no one suspected Nancy. As before, she remained above suspicion, free to continue her deadly path. With Richard barely buried, Nancy turned again to the Lonely Hearts columns. Through one ad, she connected with Samuel Doss, a minister from Carroll County, Arkansas, who had tragically lost his wife and children in a tornado. At the time, Samuel was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he worked as a businessman. Sober and deeply religious, he seemed like the ideal candidate, respectable, dependable, and sincere. The courtship was brief and passionate, and by July 1953, Nancy and Samuel were married in Tulsa. Samuel wasn't violent like her previous husbands, but he had his own flaws. His strict puritanical rules irritated Nancy. He insisted on going to bed at sundown and banned all forms of entertainment: no radio, no television, not even a fan in the Oklahoma heat. Nancy endured his household rules for a time, but soon left him in protest, only to return with a new strategy. She added her name to his bank accounts and quietly took out 2 life insurance policies, naming herself the sole beneficiary. Just 2 months into the marriage, she tried to poison Samuel by spiking his coffee with rat poison, but she miscalculated the dosage. Samuel became violently ill and began convulsing, ultimately vomiting enough to save his life. Doctors initially believed he had a severe intestinal infection. He was admitted to the hospital in critical condition, with high fever and flu-like symptoms. Nancy stayed by his side each day, returning home only at night. After a month, on October 5, 1954, he was discharged. Nancy seemed overjoyed and told Samuel they should celebrate. Back home, she prepared a hearty meal, far more flavorful than the bland food he'd been given in the hospital. For dessert, she served prune cake, rich and sweet, but hiding her signature secret, arsenic. Samuel devoured the meal. By morning, he was dead. That same day, while planning her husband's funeral, Nancy also began filing the paperwork to collect on the 2 life insurance policies. Once again, her plan appeared to have gone off without a hitch. But this time, Nancy had overlooked a crucial detail. Samuel had been seeing the same physician for years, a man who was also a personal friend. When he learned of Samuel's sudden death just a week after his hospital discharge, alarm bells went off. The doctor contacted an attorney who persuaded a judge to order an autopsy. Still, the doctor needed Nancy's consent. He told her that learning the true cause of her husband's death might help prevent similar losses in the future. She agreed. The autopsy revealed high levels of arsenic in Samuel's body, enough to kill 5 men. It was no accident. It was murder. The doctor contacted the Tulsa police, voicing his suspicions. Detectives were dispatched to Nancy's home. When they arrived, they found the 50-year-old woman calm and composed. She smiled warmly, showed no resistance, and politely asked if she could bring along her current issue of Romantic Hearts, which was lying on her coffee table. At the police station, Nancy didn't speak of the death. Instead, she quietly flipped through the magazine, eyes scanning the Lonely Hearts ads for a new man to write to. Detectives eventually confiscated the magazine and asked her to focus on the interrogation. They questioned her about Samuel's sudden passing. Nancy responded with vague comments, her attention still on the pages in front of her. But persistence paid off. Eventually, the agents secured not one, but multiple confessions. In custody, Nancy Doss began to talk, and what she revealed shocked even the most seasoned detectives. She calmly confessed to killing her 4 previous husbands and even one of her mothers-in-law, Arlie Lanning's mother. When asked why, she offered a chillingly simple motive. None of them measured up. They were all drunkards, womanizers, or violent, she said. All she ever wanted was the perfect husband, a real, lifelong romance, like the ones described in her beloved magazines. She went on to admit to murdering her own mother, her sister Dovie, and her grandson Robert. But there, the confession stopped. When questioned about the deaths of her other daughter, her second grandson, and additional relatives, Nancy remained silent. She insisted she had never harmed any of her blood relatives, contradicting her own earlier statements. Yet investigators weren't convinced. It was far too suspicious that so many people around Nancy had died suddenly and under similar circumstances. Authorities exhumed the bodies of husbands, relatives, and children who had died since 1929. Forensic testing confirmed the presence of arsenic in nearly all of them. Among the confirmed victims were 4 husbands, 2 daughters, 2 sisters, her mother, her mother-in-law, and both grandsons. Investigators also discovered that, just before Samuel Doss's death, Nancy had already begun corresponding with a new man, a highway worker from North Carolina. She had even baked him a cake and mailed it as a gift. If not for Samuel's doctor sounding the alarm, that man may have become her next victim. The cake, police believed, was meant to be a deadly introduction. When detectives asked Nancy what she thought should happen to her for poisoning so many people, she smiled and replied, "Whatever you want to do is perfectly fine with me." During her earliest interviews with the press, Nancy's constant laughter while discussing the murders earned her a disturbing nickname, the Giggling Granny. Though Nancy had confessed to multiple murders, the state of Oklahoma chose to prosecute her only for the killing of Samuel Doss. In her defense, she blamed her actions on a childhood head injury, the result of the train accident when she was 7. She claimed it caused chronic pain and mental instability, but psychiatric evaluations determined she was legally sane. On May 17, 1955, Nancy Doss pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to death. Other states, Alabama, Kansas, and North Carolina, also filed murder charges. But when Oklahoma handed down the death sentence, those jurisdictions dropped their cases, concluding that one execution would be enough. Nancy could have become the first woman in Oklahoma history to be executed by electric chair. But after additional psychological reviews, the judge declared her mentally unfit for execution, citing concerns about precedent and the ethics of executing a woman with diminished mental capacity. As a result, Nancy was spared the death penalty. She was never charged in any of the additional murders. Sentenced instead to life in prison, she embraced her fate with surprising cheerfulness. After arriving at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, she granted interviews and spoke openly about her life behind bars. She claimed she got along well with other inmates, but expressed one complaint: she was only ever assigned to laundry duty. As an excellent cook, she had repeatedly requested kitchen work, but officials, and likely the other inmates, were too afraid she'd poison the food. 2 years into her sentence, Nancy expressed regret, not for the lives she had taken, but for not receiving the death penalty. Still, she remained upbeat and even joked about her crimes. Over time, she gave several new confessions, always downplaying financial motives and emphasizing her dream of finding true love. But this explanation never accounted for the deaths of her babies, her sisters, and her mother. Why she killed those closest to her, many completely helpless, remains a mystery she took to the grave. On June 2, 1965, Nancy Doss died of leukemia in the prison hospital at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She had served only 10 years. Her remains were buried in McAlester, Oklahoma, a site that, over time, became a local curiosity and frequent stop for tourists intrigued the case. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.